Hey everybody, I'm Jordan with Warpfire Minis. We finally got our battle tome, the battle scroll's out, so let's jump into Skaven. So today we're jumping into our first tier list, and we're going to rank things as either S, A, B, and then we're just jumping all the way right down to F. So for ranking, we're going to do S tier as things you want to have in your list. A are going to be rock solid additions. B will be things that you could bring it and it's not going to really shoot yourself in the foot. And then F tier, this is things they're just crap, don't bring them, they're bad. We're going to flip through the book, and first up is going to be Mr. Vizzik. And he's a really cool new addition. The model is incredible. And what he's bringing to the table is just a lot of prayers. He's a priest too, so he can chant 2 prayers. And then his ability for Death Frenzy is a special prayer. You can do that in your own hero phase and in the opponent's hero phase without having to spend a CP for that magical intervention. When I saw this guy, I saw Death Frenzy and I got really excited until I read the prayer. It used to be where we could put it on a unit, and then when they die, they're going to fight. And that's just a really, really awesome ability for us. But they changed it this time to now it's going to grant the unit the ability to fight twice. So you're going to fight once, then you get strike last. And at the very end of combat, you're going to get to fight again. And that's still a very good ability. And there are moments where that's going to impact the game for you. But the problem is a lot of our melee threats are just very frail. So if you're bringing Clanrats or Stormvermin or even something like Rat Ogors, you're going to fight that one time. And if you don't kill the thing you're fighting, they're going to hit you back and you're going to lose half or 3/4 of your squad to where that second fight isn't going to be super impactful. So if it was Death Frenzy where we just died and fought, it would have been much better, but we got to work with what we've got. And the other cool thing he brings to the table is his Rampage. And what is, you just roll a dice, and on a 2-up, that enemy unit has to put all of their attacks into Vizzik, and they get -1 to hit and -1 to wound. So that's really, really good, and a cool trick with that is you can try to bubble wrap him with some Clanrats or Stormvermin, to where only a few enemy models are actually going to be in combat range of Vizzik himself. And that way, they're only going to get to fight with those models in range, and the rest of the models that are into those Clanrats are just going to totally lose their attacks. So if you can pull that off, very, very cool. But that's going to be hard to pull off. You have to position everything perfectly to where your opponent can't end their charge outside of 3. If they do that, they just totally deny you the chance to even do the Rampage. So going to be tricky to keep that perfectly set up over the course of a 5-round game. Other than that, he's 15 wounds, which sounds great, but they gave him a 5-up save, and that's a bummer. Like, with so much shooting in the game, especially now after the battle scroll, it really looks like Lumineth is going to be one of those top armies. And Vizzik is a piece that they're going to be able to just shoot with those kangaroos. You're not going to even get your ward save. You're going to be saving on 6s with the Rend. Like, they're just going to pick them up. And the style that Vizzik brings, you're probably going to build a whole list around him. And if you build a whole list around him and then he dies turn 1 or turn 2, it's going to be tough to compete for the rest of the game. And so for Vizzik, I'm going to slot him in that B tier. And that's, you could build a list around him and it could function, but it's not necessarily going to be easy, especially against those armies that look like they're probably going to be on the top of the meta. Next up is Thanquol, and from the index to the book, he stayed exactly the same, which is great news. I love this guy. I've put him in all of my lists, and people look at him and don't really understand it sometimes. So the things he's bringing to the table for you are, he's got +1 to cast, which means he's our best caster, and our spell lore is just really, really good. Between Skitterleap being the new unlimited spell, Wither for D3 mortal wounds, and then Fight Last, those are all super impactful. So having a +1, potentially +2 next to a place of power to get those spells off is a really big deal. And the +1 really helps us when we're doing magical intervention, and we get -1 to cast. Offsetting that gives us potential to deny tactics or get stuff out to safety through a clutch Skitterleap. Then his War Scroll spell, it's a 13-inch range where you shut off commands. Super, super impactful. Being able to deny a counter charge from an opponent when you know that's their plan is a really big deal. And for all of our shooting, which looks to be one of our strengths going forward, if you can hit it with that command, it turns off all-out defense, which is essentially going to give us an extra rend for our shooting attacks. Other than that, he heals D3 at the end of every turn, so he's going to be totally immune to all chip damage from stuff like Tzeentch's Burning or Maggotkin Disease. And if he does end up getting shot by the opponent, he's likely not going to die, and then between this D3 heal and a rally, you're going to heal him back up to full really quick. Then in melee combat, he's no slouch either. Between his melee attacks, shooting attacks, and his rampage, he's normally good for about 12 damage. So you can safely send him into chaff. He'll go beat some stuff up. He can go into little small foot heroes and kill him. So just a really useful tool. So for Thanquol, we're sliding him in that S tier. He's in every single list I make. I think it's the move, so put him at the top. So next up is Lord Skreech, and this guy, they made him stay exactly the same as the index, which kind of sucks. Lord Skreech, like the king of all of the Verminlords, you want him to be awesome, and he's just not. Damage-wise, it's just okay. All of his abilities are kind of eh, and he's the most expensive one at like 430 points, so this guy, I don't see a world where you bring him over all of the other options available to you, so we're going to just put him right at the bottom in that F tier. Then we've got the Verminlord Deceiver, and this guy, again, he's a rock star, goes in almost all of my lists. His ability to teleport combined with Scurry Away, so you got that 4-up and the 3-up to get away. It turns him into like pretty much our only unit you can safely send out to go do things, and if the opponent charges him, he's not going to die. Like, odds are he just jumps totally out of the combat, so he's one of our few units. It can soak a hit and still live by not getting hit at all. Then that teleport just gives you all sorts of cool opportunities that it's difficult for your opponent to keep track of what all he can do, or just scurrying away to go take an objective, because with that OC5, he's just really, really good. He's got a solid shooting attack, his melee profile is great with crit mortals. He's definitely one of our top pieces, so boom, sticking him in the S tier. Then we got the Verminlord Warbringer. This guy used to be my favorite, but again, doesn't do as much damage as he used to. His ability to let things all out defense more than once is really cool, but you have to spend an extra CP to do it. So like all out attacking or all out defensing 2 units and spending 2 CP, it's not something we normally can afford to do, just CP wise. So if he's just bringing okay damage and no abilities at the table, he's not great. So I'm just going to put him straight down there in that F tier. Like, you could bring him if you wanted to bring a bunch of Stormvermin, but again, I just don't think that's the play going forward. Then sticking with the Verminlords, we've got the Corruptor, and this is the Pestilence guy. He's a priest now, which is cool, but if you want to bring a priest, Vizzik just does it better, and he's not really bringing anything else to the table. There's the Great Plagues. If you wanted to run Pestilence with just a ton of priests and try to fish for a 6 to do some extra Great Plague damage, that's a thing you can do, but it's not consistent, and it's going to be tough to win games consistently, especially with a lot of GTs switching to 8 games now. Like, that might work for you for 1, 2, or 3 games, but is it going to work 8 games in a row? No. So this guy, again, unfortunately, going straight to the F tier. Then the last Verminlord, we got the Warpseer, and this guy's actually good. We're changing the tune here. The extra 2 inches from the Claw Steps move, the D6 mortals when you need it, his spell to take one of their dice away from their charge rolls, so it's just 1d6. All super useful tools. He's one of the cheapest Verminlords, which is great, but his melee damage is kind of eh. He's usually good for about like 6.5, 7 damage. You want more out of a big monster, but all those other things he's bringing to the table make him useful. But he's also a wizard too, and one other issue we run into is he's 340 points. So he's 220 points more than a Greyseer. But you're going to find a lot of times when you're building out your lists, if you have 220 points left, there isn't anything good you can bring for that. You can't get a reinforced squad of anything. All of our units in our book are like 130 or more. So like 220, you could bring 2 Doom-Flayers or 10 Night Runners. But you look at a Greyseer being upgraded to a Warpseer, that's a pretty big jump. And a lot of times that's going to be better than that just 1 extra unit. So Warpseer, I like him. He's going to be good in most lists. We're going to put him in that A tier. Jumping straight over to a regular foot hero Greyseer. And again, if you need those 220 points to do something else, like if you do have 260 whatever points left where you can get a reinforced squad or something, the foot Greyseer is awesome. 120 points, only wizard 1 now, but he's still got the 3d6 cast, so getting manifestations out, using our great spell lore. Greyseer, awesome addition to every list, S tier. Then the bigger version, we got the Greyseer on Screaming Bell. This one, the melee profile's okay. It's usually good for about 7 damage. The bell part of it is really good. -1 to hit for a 13-inch bubble. It's just huge. You can cover a large portion of the board. You usually keep most of your army in that range. But you have to roll the dice for the effect. And on a 1, you hurt yourself. On a 2 through 4, you get the -1 to hit, and that's great. But then on a 5 or a 6, you do D3 mortal wounds to things within 13 inches of you. And That's good, but what it leaves you with is you really want that -1 to hit, and you're only going to get it half the time. So if you get it the half the time you need it, the bell's going to be awesome, and it's better than the Warpseer. But when you roll that bell dice and you don't get it, it's just worse and doesn't bring as much to the table. So for the Grey Seer on Scream of Bell, I'm going to put him in that B tier. You can bring him, it's not going to shoot yourself in the foot, and if you do get lucky and you keep hitting that -1, he's going to do great. Then going back to some foot heroes, we got some Scryer guys now. The Arch-Warlock changed, and now whenever you use Covering Fire, if you're wholly within 13 of them, you don't have to spend a CP to do it. And our army is kind of CP hungry, so that is a very useful tool to have. And he's still a Wizard 1, so he can cast a spell. Then he's got a little shooting attack, his melee profile is okay, and being a Scryer hero, he can bring multiple weapons teams, which is really good in list building. So this guy going to be A tier, and this guy, he's solid. Then we got a new guy with the Warlock Galvaneer. He's the one who pairs up with the Scourgers, and he can change their attacks characteristic once per battle from being 2d6 to being 10. So if you're running a squad of 6 Scourgers, you could bring this guy to give them like one big kapow per game. And that's a useful tool, but for the points, he doesn't cast a spell or anything. So for this guy, I'd put him in that B tier. You can bring him, it's not going to kill you or anything like that. And if you're bringing the Scourgers, it is going to be good, but generally speaking, having an Arch-Warlock probably a little bit better. Then sticking with the Scryer theme, we've got Stormfiends. And Stormfiends, they are still really good. Again, they stayed exactly the same from the index, 260 points for 3. You don't want to build the shooty ones, just go Warpfire Thrower, Doom-Flayer Gauntlets, or Shot Gauntlets, whichever style you prefer. And then you want that Warp Grinder Fist. The Grinder Fist is going to let them pop up from Deep Strike during any movement phase, so your turn or your opponent's turn. And that's just a really, really cool tool for denying tactics, or just being in a spot your opponent doesn't expect, ready to just punch them in the face when it goes to your turn. So these guys rock solid. A lot of lists are going to be built around them where you've got a big 6-pack of Stormfiends ready to rumble. Put these guys in the S tier. Then back to some foot heroes, we got the Warlock Bombardier. The Arch-Warlock is just better. This guy's F tier, just not bringing anything to the table. And then his buddy, the Warlock Engineer, that's the one that goes with the Jezzails and can let you ignore guarded hero. The current meta and how things look like they're going to be going forward, not ultra useful. So I'm again going to drop this guy down into F. If you're bringing a bunch of Jezzails and like you want to do that, you can. But Jezzails aren't our best shooting unit anymore. So if you're using the Ratling Guns or any of those weapons teams, he's not better than an Arch-Warlock. From there we got the Warp Lightning Cannon. And one of my favorite models, always super fun rules, just dealing a bunch of mortal wounds, super, super fun with all the random stuff that can happen. But it's not our best shooting unit. Even Jezzails, who aren't our best shooting unit, are better. They do more consistent damage. You don't have any risk of dying or killing yourself. So Warp Lightning Cannon for me, gonna drop it down there in the F tier. Then we've got Acolyte Globadiers, and awesome models. Like with all these new Skaven sculpts, they really killed it. So these guys look incredible, way better than the old pewter models. But unfortunately, the War Scroll doesn't match. The damage, they're trying to make them into like anti-infantry squad stuff, but the range is so short, the damage is just okay, and that's only if you're into infantry. They did get 2 wounds, but they've got a 6-up save, so just any kind of shooting is going to kill them. They do have a weapons team rule, and all the weapons teams get this, and it's where you can't be shot unless the opponent's within 13 inches of you, if you're standing next to some Clanrats that have 5 or more models. So that can help protect them, but again, for the points, you're just not doing enough damage at enough range for it to be worth it. And this would have been a really cool spot with all of our units are that 130 points or more. It would have been really cool for these guys to maybe be like 100 points. Because then there's a lot of times when you're list building, you have like 100 points left over where if you could have brought a reinforced squad of these guys, even though they're not awesome, you still might bring them just to kind of fill a gap. So hopefully they come down in points, but for right now, they're in the F tier. Then while we're talking about weapons teams, we've got the Ratling Gun. And this thing is the best thing in our book. And I don't necessarily love that. When our army has to build into like hyper shooting stuff, sometimes it can lead to feels bads for your opponent. With these Ratling Guns, they do 3d6 shots each. It's a squad of 3. You're going to reinforce it to be a squad of 6. So it's 18d6 shots. If you all out attack and get your Warp Cog bonus, it's going to be 3s and 3s. The 6s explode to hit at Rend 1, damage 1. Potentially Rend 2 if you do roll a 6 on that Warp Cog. And what it equates to is like, on average, you're rolling 65 dice. and then you're going to do like 20 damage to things with the 4-up save, and that's pretty wild. And it's going to get kind of frustrating for your opponents because rolling all of those dice, it takes a little bit of time. And the whole time you're rolling those dice, your opponent's going to be sitting there thinking just like, gosh, this kind of sucks. And they're kind of right. But for the way things are right now, they're the best thing in our book. You're going to want to at least a squad of 6 in every list you bring. If you want to have 9 or 12 of them, I get it. It's going to be good. They're S tier. If I had an S+, they're it. Bring Ratling Guns. Then not too far behind are the Warpfire Throwers. And these guys without the buffs actually do a little bit more damage. And they can shoot in combat, which is very attractive. But they just have a short range. The Ratling Guns are 15 inches, and the Warpfire Throwers are just 10 inches. And it doesn't sound that bad. You're going to be able to get them into shooting range of stuff like turn 2 and turn 3. But what I don't like about it is that it's going to be easy for your opponent to avoid covering fires with it. With that 10-inch range, they can just add an inch or two to most of their charges and just stay out of it. Where the Ratling Guns with that 15 inches, it's going to be pretty easy to zone out portions of the board where if they do come in, they're going to get shot. So Warpfire Throwers, I'll take them to A tier. They're really, really good. If you have fewer points and like it's the only thing you can fit in, bring them anyways. But I just like the Ratling Guns a little bit more. Then the last weapon team, the Scourgers, kind of the same story. I like the Ratling Guns a little bit more, but this one's just about points. The Scourgers, they're 190, where the Ratling Guns are 150. And the Scourgers, they do pretty much exactly the same damage as the Ratling Guns, which is great. They have exactly the same range, but they have anti-cavalry 1. So into cavalry units, the Scourgers are better. And so we talked earlier about sometimes you have that weird kind of 100 points left in your list. And so if you do have that, if you want to spend the extra 80 points for your reinforced squad of Ratling Guns to turn into Scourgers, that's a good move and these guys are solid. But just because they do cost those extra points, we'll put them A tier instead of S. Then on the same page is the Doomwheel, and this guy's doomed. He's not good. I tried a list running 5 of them just to see if I bring a bunch, can I proc all these mortal wounds and like potentially do something? And you can't. The shooting attack's not very good. You lost the ability to overcharge it. The only thing it brings to the table is speed. And if I needed speed, I'm probably just going to bring Night Runners or Doom-Flayers instead. So right now, Doomwheel's unfortunately going to F tier. Then there's a lot of Scryer stuff, so we're still cruising through it. We got the Warlock Jezzails are next. And Jezzails, they kind of nerfed them for the new book, which is unfortunate. We went from a 24-inch range down to 18 inches, and we lost our ability. We used to get +1 to hit if we stood still. Now you just get +6 inches to range. And like, that's good, takes us back to the 24. But the unit also moves 6, so like, you can move up and shoot 24 anyways. So it's only really relevant for when you want to just stay in place and not get any closer to the enemy and just try and pick stuff off. The damage is still solid, stays about the same. But with the nerf to priority target, now you have to be within like 12 or 13 inches of them for priority target bonus to hit. It knocks the Jezzails down a little bit, especially when we're comparing them to our new weapons teams that are just better. So for the Jezzails, I'm going to put them in the B tier. You can bring them and they're going to be okay, but there are just better options out there right now. Next up is the Ratling Warpblaster, and just don't bring this guy. Ratling Guns are strictly better in every single way. There is no reason to bring this. F tier. Sorry, guys. And then next up are the Doom-Flayers, and I have a love-hate relationship with these guys. When you do the math, they're really good. It's 130 points for a squad of 2. You're going to reinforce it to bring a squad of 4 of these guys and try and chew through some infantry. It's 2d6 attacks per model, 3s, rend 1, 1 damage. Goes to 2 damage on the charge, and rend 2 if it's into infantry. So those are all great numbers. The problem is they're OC 1. So you're going to need to hit that objective and kill every single infantry model on it, or you're not going to take the objective away. And then the random number of attacks, we're rolling a lot of dice, so the attacks part of it's going to average out kind of okay. But then the movement of it is also random. So they go 2d6 plus 3, which just means like sometimes they're going to be really fast and you're going to love it. And then you're going to roll double ones one time. They're only going to move 5 inches. You're going to fail your battle tactic because of it and just get frustrated. But for melee damage things, these guys are one of our better units for it. And when they're hitting on 3s and 3s, you can all out attack to be 2s and 3s. It's one of our more consistent ways to do melee damage. So these guys, I'm going to put them in A tier. I think you're going to see them in some lists. And then our last Scryer unit is going to be the Warp Grinder. And When I saw this guy was coming back, I got super pumped. I use these all throughout 3rd edition and love them. The idea of bringing any Skaven unit along and deep striking them in opens up all sorts of windows of opportunity for us. But when it comes to his actual rules, they just miss the mark. You get to deep strike in, and you deep strike in within 3 inches of an enemy unit, which is really cool for like a big melee threat, like Rogers would be sweet for this. But you only come in if you roll a 4-up. And so if you fail the 4-up, you just don't get to bring your big melee powerhouse onto the board, which is a bummer. You could still bring them through a Gnawbeast in the same turn later on if you fail this roll. So like they're not just dead and not doing anything, but needing that 4-up to hit it makes it a bad ability. And then you also can't pick an enemy unit if there's another enemy unit within 6 inches of them, which just means if your opponent is playing a good game, they're not going to give you the opportunity to hit anything you ever want to hit. Like, okay, you might be able to go hit this chaff that they put out for take the flanks, but like turn 1, if you're going first, you're not going in. Turn 2, probably not going in. Turn 3, you need a 4-up, and like you're going to hit something that doesn't really matter. It's just not good. F tier. Now we're jumping into Pestilence, and the first one up is the Plague Furnace. And it's again a situation where Vizzik just does it better, so there's really no reason to bring this guy. The 6-up word for Plague Monks isn't going to keep them alive versus anything, so he's just bringing nothing to the table. F tier. Then we got a new addition with the Plaguepack, and that's just Skabbik and his boys are back, and they're awesome. It's 140 points, you get a Priest 1, and it's a little unit. So you can use them as screens, you can use them for holding objectives. The melee part of it's okay, but our prayer lore is really good. These guys are your most points efficient way to have access to it. And then as a bonus, if they do die, you can bring them back from your Gnawbeast because they're infantry, and then boom, you've got Priest 1 right back on the board, ready for your next turn. So I'm not building a lot of infantry heavy lists right now, but if I did, definitely bringing Plague Packs. They're going to be S tier. Then we got the Plagueclaw Catapult. Its ability isn't consistent enough to trigger. Giving things strike last would be really good, but this just isn't going to proc its ability to do it. So it's bringing nothing to the table. Every other shooting option we have in the book is better. F tier. And then the last Pestilence unit is going to be Plague Monks, and they're still really good. We lost the pile-in. Like, that was a huge source of all of our power for the index, and losing that pile-in is a really, really big bummer and totally changes the playstyle of the army. But they're 140 points. They're still doing all the same stuff other than the pile-in, so they are our cheapest source of bodies. Clanrats are only 10 points more now, so are Clanrats better? Yes. But sometimes in list building, you're going to find yourself where you need those 10 points. And so downgrading a squad of Clanrats to Plague Monks isn't a huge step down. So if those extra 10 points can get you something good, Plague Monks are still worth using. I'm going to put them in the A tier. Then we've made our way to the Verminous section, and first up is Krittok. And again, saw this guy who was coming out, super excited. I really want to run Stormvermin. I like the models. I like the idea of like an elite infantry, Skaven guys going in and doing some good damage. But Krittok, he just doesn't get it done. +1 to wound on Stormvermin, good. Fight first, good. 220 points, terrible. F tier. Then staying on the same theme, we've got the Clawlord on foot and the Clawlord on Gnawbeast. And both of them, again, just not really bringing anything to the table. The foot Clawlord, he could have been good. He's got the ability to where when he fights, he can have a unit fight immediately after him. So like you pair him up with a unit of Stormvermin and like this is supposed to be cool. But almost every other army in the game, when they have that fight immediately after effect, they get to give them some kind of bonus. Like it's going to give them +1 to hit or +1 to wound or some sort of buff. And ours just doesn't do anything. So cool, your Clawlord gets to fight. He does 4 damage. Like, it just doesn't add anything real to your list for the points. And same story on the Gnawbeast. He's kind of fast. So like if you wanted to do that, that's something. But like Doom-Flayers or Night Runners, everybody else is going to do it a little bit better. And they're cheaper points-wise. So both Clawlord guys, F tier. Then we've got the mainstay Clanrats. They're one of the best chaff units in the game. It's 20 bodies, 150 points. We got a 5-up save. They're awesome. You're going to run Clanrats in every single list. It's the S tier, and it's the most S tier something can get for Skaven. Then the last Verminous unit's going to be Stormvermin. And I know I've been kind of crapping on these guys, but they're actually pretty decent. When you put them in Claw Horde, they get Rend 2 when they're charging. They also get Rend 2 when they're charged. So when you math it out, like a squad of 10 is actually putting out pretty solid damage numbers. The problem is just all of our stuff, it's a 4-up save and they're 1 wound each. So if your opponent has any kind of chip shooting stuff, it's just going to wreck your squad. If you hit by anything, it's going to wreck your squad. And so without any cool movement tricks, they're kind of hard to get where you need them to be to do the damage. And then you're only really going to get to do it once. Like, you might hit something and kill it, then they're going to hit you right back and you're dead. Then we're also paying points for their ability. If a foot hero is nearby, the foot hero gets a 5-up ward. And we just don't care about that. Like, if my Grey Seer gets a 5-up ward, okay, whatever. When you look at something like Source Guard, they have the same ability. They give a 5-up ward to the hero and a 5-up ward to themselves. So if like the Stormvermin also would have got the 5-up ward, these guys would have been all-stars. But with the ability, we're paying the points for it. The damage is good, but they're just a little bit too frail for my liking. So I'll put them A tier still, just because for our melee options, they are one of the best. But when you compare those to other melee hammers and other armies, they're just bad. Jumping into Clan Moulder, we've got the Master Moulder himself, and they changed him for the worse. He used to give +2 to charge, now he gives +1 to charge instead. So like the idea of popping out of a knothole with the Hell Pit and going for a big charge probably isn't going to work now that they can just redeploy away. And it might work, but it's not going to consistently work, should be how I put it. But this guy, I don't really think there's a reason to bring him. For the points, you could just bring a Grey Seer instead. You're going to get a 3d6 cast for a spell that's just strictly better. So Master Moulder, unfortunately, even with your little heal 3, you're in the F tier. Next up is the Hell Pit, and this guy, one of my favorite models. I used him for the whole edition of 3rd. I love him. His abilities are really cool. His War Scroll is still pretty solid. I like the 13 attacks, getting Ren 3 on infantry. He kept his too horrible to die thing where he can come back, and he gained where he can heal at the end of the turn. So if you can put him into some kind of chaff units and he doesn't die, he's going to heal back up really fast, which is neat. But he's 270 points, and right now that's just a little bit too expensive for a monster with a 5-up save. Any kind of army with shooting, and again, we're looking at Lumineth's probably going to be one of the top ones. They're just going to point at him and you're going to pick him up off the board, and that's a bummer. So hopefully they bring this guy down in points in some future updates. But for right now, I'll put him in the B tier. Like, you could bring him and he's going to be okay. It's not going to make it to where you can't win games or anything like that. But really hope they take him down a little bit, bump him up. Then we're moving into Rat Ogres. And these guys are our best melee damage unit in the book. With all the buffs you can give them, the Moulder buff for +1 attacks, giving themselves +1 attacks, giving them the prayers for +1 to wound and crit mortals, like, they can soak up all of these buffs and really make use of it. So I think a squad of 6 with the max juice can go in and do around 30 damage to a 4-up save. It's just hard to get that max juice. Like, you got to roll that Moulder buff, you got to get the prayer, you need the prayer to be the supercharged version of the prayer. And again, with the movement, they don't have any cool tricks for movement. Like, we don't have run and charge. We don't have 3d6 charges like some of these other armies. And having a 5-up save, again, they're just super, super frail. So if your opponent's army has a lot of shooting, or if they hit you first, your Rat Ogres are going to die and be ineffective. And a reinforced squad of 6 can do real damage. The squad of 3, it's going to be a struggle. So like your 6-pack's going to go in, and if it dies, yeah, you get 3 back. But that 3 is going to go run into 10 Chosen, maybe kill 1 or 2 models and just die. So it just doesn't do a whole lot when it does come back. But the little Warpfire Throwers are useful. You get the 2d6 shots, and you could have 2 of them in there with it. So you can use that to kind of leverage, get some extra value out of it. And all things considered, they are our like biggest numbers. If you want to do melee damage, Rat Ogres are probably your best bet at it. So for our book, I'll put them S tier. Like, just again, melee, if you want it, these guys can do it. But again, when you compare them to melee hammers in other armies, it's kind of tough for them to compete. Then the last Moulder is going to be the Brood tier. And this was another one I was just pumped for. Like, seeing the model, it looked really, really cool. I got to see the rules before I saw the points, and his rules are really, really good. Got a cool shooting attack, does decent melee damage. His ability for his rampage on a 2-up to have a -1 to hit bubble, that's really, really good. But then they just murdered my boy with points. They made him 300, and there's just no world you bring him for 300 points. I'll stick him B tier, just because I don't have the heart to put him in F. But all of his abilities and all of his things are useful tools. 300 points is just too much for him. Then the last clan, we got Clan Eshin, and there's only 2 surviving members. We've got the Deathmaster and Night Runners. And for the Deathmaster, there were rumors he was going down to 100 points, and I was pumped. I was making cool lists and getting ready, like that's something we could actually use. But unfortunately, he stayed at 160 points, and his damage is lackluster. The only thing he's bringing to the table is unlocking Run and Charge for your other Eshin units, which does open up cool opportunities for like your Deceiver to be able to run and charge, or a bunch of squads of Night Runners zooming around is cool and would be good. 160 points is just a little bit too much for just that ability. So for him, I'll put him B tier. Like, you can bring him and you could build into that and make a list that's going to function. He's just not going to be like the best optimal choice. Then the last one is going to be Night Runners, and these guys are really good. They're 6 up saves and 1 wound each, so ultra frail. But they've got good rules where they can try and be near terrain so they can't be shot. They get a pregame move. So they move 7 inches base. So pregame you can do a 7-inch move. Then when it goes to your turn or your opponent's turn, you can either do your regular move another 7 or call steps up 7. So they're able to score early tactics like take the flanks or take their lands if you need to. And the little chip damage they do with their shooting is useful. Like sometimes you have something just tied you up and you need to do 2 or 3 damage to it. These guys can zoom over there and get it done for you. And then again, with that pregame move, sometimes like you know an army's going to alpha strike you. You can pregame move them up 7, then 3 claw steps them up another 7. And so you could be 14 inches, like 3 or 4 inches away from their front line to try and slow them down as a big speed bump. So between all the cool things you can do with that pregame move, their extra little bit of speed and those shooting attacks, I'm going to put these guys S tier. And again, just keep in mind, it's not damage. Like, they're not bringing damage to the table. It's just some little chip damage here or there. But just that speed, I think it's a really, really good tool. I usually have at least 1 squad of these guys in all my lists just because it's a really good tool to use. So that's it for the Skaven tier list. And I'm going to do another video where I'll give you some like tips and tricks of actually playing the army, as well as some list building tips. But this will give you a good idea of just what units you should be trying to squeeze in there. And then, as always, if you need some more models, check us out at warpfireminis.com. Thank you.